They saw a quiet civilian analyst, an easy target for a cruel joke in the freezing storm. They thought they were putting her in her place. They had no idea they were disrespecting a living legend. The storm hitting Fort Cobalt wasn't just rain, it was a raw elemental fury. Wind howled like a predator, and sheets of freezing water lashed the landscape. For Alara Vance, this was just another variable. She stood at parade rest on the edge of the asphalt drill square, her gaze fixed on the turbulent gray horizon. An hour ago, a trio of fresh-faced recruits, led by a private named Rizzo with more swagger than sense, had ordered her out here. The pretext was to verify the serial number on a distant perimeter floodlight. The real reason was a petty power play to put the new civilian analyst in her place. They saw a woman in her early 30s with ash blonde hair woven into a tight, complex braid that defied the wind. They saw eyes the color of a winter sky and a quiet demeanor they mistook for weakness. So she stood, letting the icy water soak her simple gray jacket, a motionless silhouette against the chaos. But her stillness wasn't submission. It was discipline. While Rizzo and his friends watched from the dry cover of a barracks doorway, their laughter swallowed by the gale, Alara's mind was a tactical computer. The storm wasn't an inconvenience. It was a data stream. The distorted visibility created blind spots between guard towers, wide enough for a two-man team to slip through unnoticed. The flow of water across the asphalt revealed subtle grating, information crucial for predicting the spread of incendiaries. The wind whipping around the motor pool created a sound shadow, a pocket of silence perfect for a covert conversation. Every gust was a variable, every drop of rain a data point in an equation she'd been solving her entire life. She cataloged the recruits' lazy posture, their unearned confidence. Rizzo was a leader, but a reckless one. His companions were followers, hungry for his approval. Children playing soldier. She saw them not as tormentors, but as a security vulnerability, a weakness in the fort's human defenses. This humiliation was temporary. Soon, everything would change. The summons came not as an apology, but as another command. A runner, barely old enough to shave, skidded to a halt before her. "Colonel Slade wants to see you," he said, avoiding her eyes. "Admin building." "Now." Alara gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. As she walked past the barracks, Rizzo and his friends fell silent. Her utter lack of reaction was more unnerving than any outburst. Colonel Slade's office was a shrine to military order. Crystal awards and challenge coins gleamed in a glass case, and a desk of polished black granite stood like a fortress between him and the world. Slade himself was cut from the same cloth. Sharp creases in his uniform, a perpetually clenched jaw, and eyes like chips of cold steel. He didn't invite her to sit. He held up a thin folder, her name typed neatly on the tab. "Specialist Vance," he began, his voice a low baritone. "I've been reviewing your file. It's sparse." Alara met his gaze without expression. "It contains all the relevant information for my assigned duties, Colonel." "Does it?" he challenged, tossing the folder onto the desk. It landed with a soft, dismissive thud. "It says you're here to optimize our supply chain. A civilian contractor, yet you carry yourself like a soldier." He leaned forward. "The men are talking. They say you stood in a storm for an hour without moving a muscle. They thought it was a joke. I'm not so sure. Who are you, Ms. Vance?" The question hung in the air. Slade was a creature of hierarchy. Alara, with her redacted past and unnerving calm, was an anomaly he couldn't place. He saw her civilian status as an intrusion. "I'm a logistics analyst, sir," she repeated, her tone unwavering. "Your last posting was with the Amaranth Group," he said, the words dripping with disdain. "Never heard of them." "We value discretion," Alara replied. Slade's eyes narrowed. "Fort Cobalt is the tip of the spear. We don't need a paper pusher from some no-name company telling us how to manage our supplies. Your presence here was not my decision. It came from the Pentagon." His gaze hardened. "Let me be perfectly clear. You are a guest, a temporary one. You will perform your duties, file your reports, and stay out of the way of the real soldiers. Is that understood?" It was an absolute dismissal. In his eyes, she was a bureaucratic burden, Understood, Colonel, she said. You will confine your observations to the supply depot and administration buildings, he continued, deliberately hamstringing her. The training grounds, the armory, the firing ranges, they are off limits to you. You have no security clearance for tactical areas. He was setting her up to fail. As you wish, Colonel. As she turned to leave, her eyes swept over his desk. She noted the secure sat phone, the encrypted laptop, and a framed photograph of a younger Slade beside another officer, a man with a familiar hawk-like intensity. General Kalen. It was a small detail, but in Alara's world, there were no insignificant details. Slade thought he had contained the anomaly. He had no idea he had just given it the one thing it needed most. The freedom of being utterly underestimated. For the next 2 weeks, Alara became a ghost in Fort Cobalt's machine. She adhered to Colonel Slade's restrictions to the letter, but a cage is only a cage if you see the bars. Alara saw a lattice of information, and she began to weave it. She didn't just read inventories. She cross-referenced ammunition requisitions with fuel consumption logs. She found a discrepancy. The 3rd Training Battalion burned 20% more fuel than the others, yet their ammunition expenditure was 10% lower. The official reason was extended patrol simulations. To Alara, it read as inefficiency. A convoy moving slowly, burning excess fuel, engaging in less training. A weakness. She spent hours in the base archives, a place no one willingly entered. The air was thick with the smell of decaying paper. She pulled the original Cold War-era blueprints for Fort Cobalt. She wasn't looking at the structures. She was looking at what was underneath. She traced the paths of old, decommissioned copper communication lines, memorized the layout of storm drains and forgotten maintenance tunnels, the base's hidden circulatory system. To others, it was obsolete infrastructure. To Alara, it was a network of redundancies. From her office window, she watched the daily rhythms of the base. She learned the guard rotations not from a schedule, but by observing the subtle shifts in posture that signaled the end of a long watch. She watched Rizzo's squad. They were fast and aggressive, but they were also loud. They shouted when hand signals would suffice. They were a hammer, useless against a target that could think. One afternoon, a young, studious specialist named Leo approached her in a warehouse. "Ma'am, Specialist Vance?" he asked tentatively, holding up a requisition form she had flagged. "You denied the request for new lithium-ion batteries for our comms units." "That's correct," she said, her voice even. "You have 300 batteries sitting on the shelf, their charge slowly decaying. Standard procedure is to maintain a stock of 500 and reorder when it drops below 400. That procedure is inefficient. It wastes resources and guarantees that in a crisis, you'll be relying on degraded equipment." Leo blinked. "My recommendation is to implement a first-in, first-out rotation. Use the oldest batteries first," she stated simply. "It will ensure 100% of your assets are mission-capable." She turned back to her clipboard. Leo stood there for a moment, stunned. This quiet civilian everyone dismissed had just exposed a fundamental flaw in their readiness with a single observation. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, a newfound respect in his voice. The whispers started to change, not about the woman who stood in the storm, but about the analyst who could see things no one else could. Alara paid them no mind. She was building a comprehensive threat assessment model of Fort Cobalt in her head. She knew its weaknesses, its vulnerabilities, its fallibilities. She knew the real storm was coming. The superstorm arrived on a Tuesday, turning the sky a bruised purple. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, TOC, the atmosphere was one of controlled chaos. Monitors glowed, displaying weather patterns, perimeter sensor readings, and communications logs. Colonel Slade stood at the center, a self-styled island of calm. "Status report," he barked. A young lieutenant, his face pale, answered, "Sir, we've lost satellite uplink. The wind shear is too high. All external comms are down. The perimeter sensors were going haywire, triggering thousands of false positives from flying debris. We're blind out there, sir." Slade's jaw tightened. "And what about Viper Squad?" The room fell silent. Viper Squad was a platoon of recruits, including Rizzo, on a routine training exercise in the rugged wilderness bordering the base. They were due to check in 30 minutes ago. "No contact, sir," the comms officer said, his voice strained. Panic began to prickle the edges of the room's discipline. The junior officers frantically tried to reboot systems, their movements becoming jerky and inefficient. Their training had not prepared them for nature stripping away their technology. Then, the last landline to Central Command crackled with static and died. The TOC was now truly an island, isolated and deaf. It was in this moment of escalating crisis that Alara Vance walked in. No one had summoned her. She moved with a quiet purpose that seemed alien to the frantic energy of the room, carrying a small, heavy-duty Pelican case. She ignored the frantic officers and walked directly to a forgotten corner, to a dusty, yellowed panel labeled Auxiliary Systems. A captain moved to intercept her. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area." Alara ignored him. She opened the case, removed a set of specialized tools, and pried open the panel, revealing a tangled nest of thick, antiquated copper wiring. Colonel Slade finally noticed her, his face contorted with fury. "Vance, what in God's name do you think you're doing? I gave you a direct order to stay out of tactical areas." Alara didn't look at him. Her hands moved with the swift, economical precision of a surgeon, stripping the ends of two thick cables. "Colonel," she said, her voice cutting through the din, calm and clear as a bell. "Your satellite array is down. Your fiber optic lines are likely damaged. Your radios are being smothered. You're trying to solve a 21st century problem with 21st century tools that are failing." She took a rugged-looking device from her case, a signal modulator with a hand crank, and began connecting it to the copper wires. "This," she continued, "is a shielded hardline laid in the 1960s to withstand an electromagnetic pulse. It hasn't been used in 30 years, but it runs directly from this TOC to an emergency bunker 10 miles east. It's old technology. It's slow, but it's reliable. And right now, reliability is the only thing that matters." The entire room had fallen silent, staring as this unassuming analyst worked on a piece of forgotten history. They had been trying to force a signal through the storm-choked sky. She had simply gone under it. With a final, decisive click, she locked the connectors into place and gave the hand crank a few powerful turns. A small green light blinked to life. She turned to the stunned comms officer. "Patch your headset into this port. Use low-band frequency. Tell the bunker to relay a message to Central Command. Inform them of our situation and request they try to raise Viper Squad on emergency channels." The officer looked at Slade, who gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. The sergeant scrambled to obey. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Fort Cobalt TOC. Do you copy?" A burst of static answered, followed by a faint voice. "Cobalt TOC, this is Bunker. Read you faint but clear." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Before Slade could speak, the comms officer shouted, "Sir, I have contact. The bunker is relaying a message from Viper Squad." Every head swiveled towards the comms station. The sergeant listened, his face growing paler. "Sir, their route was washed out. They detoured into Black Creek Ravine. The lead vehicle is disabled." He looked up, his eyes wide. "And that's not the worst of it, sir. They report seeing two unmarked, armed technicals moving towards their position. They believe they've been spotted." The room went cold. A lost training convoy had just become a potential hostage situation. Slade looked at the chaotic mess of data on the main screen. They were blind. His system had failed. He then looked at Alara Vance. She stood perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the main tactical map, tracing the topographical lines of the ravine. In a room full of panicked soldiers looking at their screens, she was the only one looking at the terrain. In that moment, Slade understood. She didn't just see a map. She saw a battlefield. The casual dismissal of Alara Vance had evaporated, replaced by a mixture of awe and desperate curiosity. All eyes, including Colonel Slade's, were now on the quiet civilian analyst. "You see something, Vance?" Slade asked, his tone stripped of its earlier condescension. The convoy's transponder is GPS-based, Alara stated, her eyes still locked on the topographical map. It gives us their location, but not their environment. The hostiles know the ravine. We don't. That's the tactical disadvantage. She walked to the main console, and the officers parted for her without a word. She brought up geological survey maps and old forestry service records, data she had pulled from the archives. The transponder is pinging from this position, she said, pointing to a blinking red dot. The hostiles are approaching from the northeast. Standard flanking maneuver. The recruits are trapped. We can't get a drone up in this weather. A captain interjected. No ISR, no eyes on target. We don't need eyes in the sky, Alara countered. We need ears on the ground. She looked at Specialist Leo, who had been called into the TOC. Leo, the seismic sensors at the perimeter fence. What's their status? Leo, startled, checked his console. They're online, ma'am, but they're throwing thousands of false readings from a storm. Filter them, Alara commanded. Ignore any reading above a 4.0 magnitude. That's environmental noise. Isolate and amplify everything between 1.5 and 2.5. I'm looking for rhythmic repeating impacts. What are we looking for? Slade asked, confused. The engine signatures of those technicals, Alara explained. They're diesel. They have a distinct, low-frequency vibration. The granite in that ravine will conduct it. The perimeter sensors are sensitive enough to pick them up. If we filter out the storm, we can track the hostiles' movement in real time. A wave of understanding rippled through the TOC. It was brilliant, unconventional, using a system for something it was never intended for. Leo's fingers flew across his keyboard. I've got it, ma'am. 2 distinct signatures moving along the northern ridge. Speed approximately 15 kilometers per hour. They're not attacking, Alara mused. They're hurting them. Deeper into the ravine. She zoomed in on the map. Here, there's a box canyon 3 clicks east. It's a natural trap. That's their destination. The shift in the room was complete. Alara was no longer an analyst. She was the de facto tactical commander. Slade stood beside her, his authority seated not by order, but by the overwhelming force of her competence. We have a QRF on standby, Slade said, his voice now that of a subordinate. They won't be going in blind, Alara said. She turned to the comms officer. Get Viper Squad back on the line. Short coded bursts. A moment later, he gave a thumbs up. Alara leaned towards a microphone. Viper leader, this is Gentry TOC. Do not acknowledge. We have you. We have the hostiles. Your job is to stay alive. I'm going to walk you out of there. The quiet observer had disappeared. In her place was a commander, and the entire TOC had become her weapon. Colonel Slade made it official. Vance, he said, his voice resonating with a newfound gravity. You have tactical oversight. The quick reaction force is yours to command. Get my men back. Alara gave a curt nod. Leo, she began, keep feeding me updates on the hostiles' position. To the comms officer, relay the following to Viper leader. Expend 10 rounds from his squad automatic weapon. Fire into the north wall of the ravine. Now, the order was bizarre. Waste ammunition? Give away their position? Slade silenced an objecting captain with a raised hand. 30 seconds later, Leo shouted, Ma'am, I've got it. The sensors picked up the impacts. I could triangulate their exact position from that. Precisely, Alara said. We just used their own weapon as a sonar ping. She turned to the QRF commander, Lieutenant Harris. Lieutenant, your team will deploy in 2 LAVs. You will take the old firebreak trail south of the ravine. It will be mud, but your vehicles can handle it. It will bring you up on the southern ridge, opposite the hostiles. The wind is from the southwest. Your engine noise will be carried away. You will have the element of surprise and the high ground. Rules of engagement? Harris asked, his eyes wide with admiration. Primary objective is recovery. Avoid direct engagement, Alara instructed. We are going to trap them. To the comms officer, tell Viper leader to fall back toward the box canyon. Move slowly. Make it look like a panicked retreat. Draw them in. For the next hour, Alara conducted a symphony of controlled tension. She guided the QRF along muddy trails using decades-old maps. At one point, the hostile stopped. "They're suspicious," Alara diagnosed instantly. "Comms, tell Viper leader to fire a red flare. That will give away their position." Slade questioned. "It's a universal signal of distress," she countered. "It will make their retreat look genuine." Minutes later, Leo reported, "They're moving again, ma'am. Faster this time. They're taking the bait." "QRF, what's your status?" Alara asked. In position on the southern ridge, Harris's voice crackled back. "Undetected. Hold your position," Alara commanded. "Wait until both hostile vehicles have entered the canyon." The final phase played out in agonizing silence. Finally, Leo confirmed both hostile signatures are inside the canyon. Alara took a deep breath. "QRF, you are weapons free. Block the entrance. Disable the vehicles." She then switched channels. "Viper leader, at the west end of the canyon, there's a game trail leading up to the southern ridge. Move your men. Now." The response was a simple, breathless copy that from a voice that sounded like Rizzo's. The trap was sprung. The storm broke just before dawn. The crisis was over. The occupants of the Technicals, a local smuggling militia, had surrendered. Viper Squad was safe. The door to the TOC hissed open, and a figure entered who commanded immediate attention. A tall, lean man with silver hair and the 2 stars of a major general on his collar. It was General Kalen. "I heard you had a busy night, Colonel," Kalen said, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "The first report mentioned a civilian analyst coordinating a rescue. My curiosity was piqued." His gaze swept the room until it landed on Alara. His eyes widened in disbelief, then softened with profound recognition. He walked past the stunned Colonel Slade directly toward her. "It's been a long time," the general said, his voice a low rumble. "Yes, sir." "It has," Alara replied. "The file just said E. Vance," he trailed off. He turned to a bewildered Slade. "Colonel, I need to see this analyst's full, unredacted security file. Top-level clearance. Omega Protocol." He turned to his aide, who produced a secured tablet. Kalen scanned the screen. "For the last 5 years," he began, his voice ringing with authority, "the special operations community has had a ghost story. A legend. An operator who could see the entire battlefield, who went by the call sign Nix." He held up the tablet. Displayed on the screen was a photograph of a much younger Alara in sterile combat fatigues. Nix led the team that recovered the hostages from the Al-Qadir compound. Nix planned the infiltration of the Red Talon mountain fortress. 0 casualties. Nix disappeared 2 years ago. We thought she was dead. He lowered the tablet and looked directly at Alara, his expression bordering on reverence. It seemed she just took a job in logistics. The reveal fell upon the room with the force of a physical impact. The quiet paper pusher was a living legend. Later, Alara stood on the edge of the same drill square. The rain had returned, a soft drizzle. Rizzo and his friends, just back from the debrief, saw her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a white-hot shame. Just then, General Kalen, followed by Colonel Slade, walked purposefully across the wet asphalt. Kalen came to a halt directly in front of her. Then, in full view of the recruits who had tormented her and the colonel who had dismissed her, Major General Kalen raised his hand to his brow. He executed the sharpest, most formal, most respectful salute of his long and decorated career. It was not a salute to a subordinate. It was the salute a soldier gives to a legend. Behind the general, Colonel Slade, his face a grim mask of humility, followed his superior's lead. He too rendered a salute. Riggs watched, his throat tight. Without a conscious thought, he snapped to attention and raised his hand in a salute as crisp as he could make it. His 2 friends did the same. And so she stood, Alara Vance, no longer an outcast, but an icon, surrounded by salutes from every level of the chain of command. The legend of Fort Cobalt wasn't about the storm, but about the quiet analyst who commanded it. It's a powerful reminder that the most formidable minds often hide in the plainest sight. What part of Alara's story shocked you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you believe in the power of quiet competence, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this. And as always, comment respect.